A depleted version of the Indiana Pacers lost to a depleted version of the Toronto Raptors last night by a score of 130 to 119. Here to talk about it with me is Samson Folk, who in my opinion is the best person covering the Toronto Raptors. And also, if you've watched anything on this channel before, I'm hoping that you'll remember that he also covered the entire Pacers playoff run with me. So there's nobody better to talk about this game and also zoom out about what's been going on with the Pacers, who have lost 4 of their last 6 games. So the last time you and I talked for public consumption, the Pacers had just been eliminated from the Eastern Conference Finals, competitively swept by the Boston Celtics. We're a few months removed from that. Long story short, this is a very different team, and they were in your city last night. What stood out to you about them within the context of the game that you watched?
They were like the Bizarro Pacers, it felt like. And I've watched some of the games this year, obviously. I'm pretty sure everybody will understand that, or that it was announced that I'm doing some work for the Basketball She Wrote Patreon this year. The forthcoming piece will be about Pascal Siakam, which I guess makes sense. Pascal was okay last night. Mathurin was okay towards the end of the game when he found a lot of opportunities for himself. The rest of what was happening, like, you guys have some scrappy guys like making stuff happen. Like Enrique getting into spots, I was like, wow, he's everywhere. Like, cool stuff like that can happen. But mostly, you mentioned it's the depleted Raptors team that got, behind RJ Barrett, who got wherever he wanted on the floor repeatedly. The Pacers couldn't figure out how they wanted to, remove the advantages from what the Raptors were doing. And granted, there's been a couple teams that have struggled to deal with Jakob Poeltl, who Joe Mazzulla called one of the best players in the league.
Hey, just to tag on there, Rick Carlisle said last night he's one of the most underrated offensive players in the league too. So.
Yeah, hopefully there's a local writer who's been talking about how good Jakob is offensively for some time, fingers crossed. But yeah, it's the 2 most successful stints in that game last night, I thought, featured a very fast Pacers team that pushed repeatedly. They had a 9-0 run in the second quarter. They had a run in the fourth quarter. And both times, they played extremely fast. And then they got extremely slow otherwise. And they cut their drives off too early. And they weren't able to keep the Raptors out of the paint, but seemed like they didn't want to get into it too desperately themselves. They have staples of their offense that are no longer extremely valuable. There are things that have been lost in the shuffle here. And that's what it feels like watching these Pacers, is that you're looking at a team that's lost something. And I don't know the ongoings of the personality stuff on the team. I don't know exactly what's happening, but they're in a very weird spot.
Let's start with the pace. The Pacers, after last night, ranked 14th in pace, 21st in transition frequency. If you had told me when we recorded that mailbag after the playoff run, the Pacers will be 14th in pace and transition frequency, 21st, what would you have guessed had happened?
I would have assumed defensive rebounding. That would be anytime a team plays slower. The reason why the Pacers, from watching and from looking at stats, the reason why the Pacers don't get on the offensive glass that much is because they want to get back in transition, and they don't allow that much transition coming back the other way. Their frequency is pretty slow. So the first thing I always look for is they're probably trying to shore up their rebounding to open up extra possessions or close out, existing ones. And my take, my take is that they're looking to close out more defensive possessions. But where are you on that?
Well, they're 22nd in opponent offensive rebounding rate. And Blake texted me briefly yesterday and asked me about this matchup. And I said, well, the Raptors rank second in the NBA at rebounding their own missed threes. And the Pacers rank 28th in allowing opponents to grab their own missed threes. They've had a lot of issues corralling long rebounds this year, getting to loose balls to the point where there was a game where ahead of it, they actually had to run loose ball and rebounding drills, which Rick had said teams don't normally do that. Part of the issue is I don't have a clip of this to show people, but there are a few teams in the NBA who have started tagging up. And what I mean by that is this is what Philadelphia did when they attempted 15 more shots than the Pacers in that game. No Joel Embiid, so they were playing a somewhat smaller lineup. And every time one of their shots went up, everybody but the shooter ran to the backs of their matchup to really drive them into the paint. And the goal of what you're doing there is it's not really, the goal isn't to get an offensive rebound. If you do, that's great. You're going to create 50-50 opportunities by doing that, but you're also staying on the high side of the matchup. So it's allowing you to automatically match up with your guy in transition where you're not having to look to buddy up, which you shouldn't be doing in transition defense anyways, but it's taking away a lot of the hit-ahead passes that Tyrese has been known to throw. So in that game, you saw the number of those go down. So it was working both ways. It's the final evolution in a sense of the possession war, right? Because in the past, we would have thought that, like, you know, you can't go to the offensive glass because you're going to risk the transition stuff the other way. Now you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. By crashing hard, you're making it more difficult for the Pacers to get out and run because they're not a great defensive rebounding team and because you're slowing down their transition attack. So that's not every game. I've seen Memphis do this. I've seen Philadelphia do this. There's a few other teams in the NBA that are testing it. But tactically, that is one element. So to your point, I think that there's a lot of conflating factors here that are leading to why the pace has slowed to this degree. But I'll ask you based on what you saw last night. When you saw the stretches where the Pacers were playing faster, what was happening in your opinion? What was leading to them playing faster?
Hit aheads to half court, basically. They were
playing with multiple ball handlers.
Yeah. And also just like, you know, you talk
and
about
Obi
like,
just being awesome.
Obi being awesome. Tyrese having like really nice stretches. Pascal was a big part of that first stretch. It was after he came back in. He left shortly. It was that 9-0 run that the Raptors got once Pascal got checked out in the second quarter, but it was before that when they took the lead 41-40. Like push. And whether it's with a live dribble right up the middle or whether it's getting it out to like the wing at half court, like just pushing really hard, getting a lot of 3-on-1 and 2-on-1 opportunities. And like some of that is the Raptors getting stuck pursuing the offensive glass, but some of that is just like that urgency of pace to get the ball up. Like it's a guy's on your hip, throw a head dribble into space, like get past him, make someone else step up. It opens up the wing. You make that pass, like just how everything correlates together there. That urgency was really important, but also there's some, I guess, like strategic factors that work into that too.
And it was also helpful that the Raptors turned the ball over a lot, if we're being honest. I do have some clips I'm going to show you about why I think some of this has been affected. Some from last night. This is the very first Pacer possession of the game after the Raptors had scored on that Pirtle roll man set that was pretty effective, I thought. But
77 veer exit.
Yeah, really, really good there on that one. Tyrese, look what Tyrese is doing here. He's telling Benedict Mathurin to go get the ball, because he knows Davion Mitchell's going to come pick him up full court. So he's telling Ben to be the bring-up ball handler. This is something you would not have seen a lot last year. Like, just to give people some context, like ahead of the in-season tournament, if Tyrese was being picked up like this full court, it was typically against hybrid lineups. Like, a team might be willing to deploy somebody as a full court pest if it was like a TJ McConnell, like a backup player who they were going to be willing, like, hey, you can use all your energy doing that. It was very rare that starting lineups were doing this. And I realize that the Raptors, which we'll talk about a little bit later, are employing a lot more ball pressure in general, but more teams are doing this. Jalen Suggs has done this in 3 games against Tyrese this year. More teams are picking him up full court and forcing somebody else to bring the ball up. So Ben, not necessarily to the degree of TJ and Andrew to be able to handle, bring up pressure. Then obviously this is an unfamiliar lineup as well. I can't imagine. I don't know if they were trying to run initially wide here or if they really wanted this to be like an off-ball rescreen for Jarus to come back and get the ball. It looks a little bit awkward to me, but Jarus gets it, and then they go into this Miami action for Tyrese to get it and swing it back to Ben. A little bit off balance there, and now look at the shot clock. They're down in the final 4 seconds again. And I wrote a piece after they played Orlando because 15% of their shots in that game came in the last 4 seconds of the shot clock, which is worse than the worst team in the NBA. It wasn't as high in this one. It was like 7%, but it's like what you said. There were spurts where they were playing fast, and there were spurts with certain lineups on the floor where they were playing very slow. And now, Ben's going to have to take a one-legged grenade here with literally less than a second on the clock. So that's one of the factors as Tyrese is being picked up full court. And then another one, this was actually helpful that I wanted to point out for people, is that when Tyrese is seeing more full court pressure, the Pacers would much prefer that he does what he just did there, which is to toss the ball ahead to the big and get it back in a pitch action. And so this would have been effective if not for the fact that Jarus, in my opinion, I don't know what you thought of Jarus's minutes last night, but He needed to take the first shot that came to him, and too much of the time, like right here, this should be a pull-up too. Instead, he's like backing up into a step back and making it, a considerably worse shot. But the actual process there was better. And before I let you respond to that, I'm just going to show a contrast here that this is why the Pacers want to use those pitch actions with the big higher to relieve the pressure on Tyrese. Because if you don't, and they flatten out with their transition spacing, this is a big no-no in the Pacers pace transition playbook, because Pascal's having to now go set a long ball screen all the way from the baseline, and they're not going to get into offense until there's 15 seconds on the clock, and that's not the only effect, because it's providing Mo Wagner with all of that time on the run-up to set the screen to be calling out the coverage repeatedly to the on-ball defender, and also allowing the Magic bench, which I don't have the sound turned on here, but if I did, you'd be able to hear Jamal Mosley yelling, keep him there, because the other factor is that every team pretty much is really heavily shading Tyrese to the left side of the court, and Tyrese's points per possession when he's driving left are like literally 0.7 points per chance by comparison to like over a point per chance when he drives right, because most of the time he doesn't even take a shot. So before I show the rest of that, your thoughts?
Tyrese bailed out of that drive on the last clip.
Because he's going left. He almost always gets off the ball if he's driving left anymore. That's
such a huge problem for a player. Is like, and that's kind of the funny thing too, is like, our dear friend, our brother in Pacers coverage on Basketball She Wrote, like he looked at RJ driving both ways like 2 years before I did. I didn't even know it existed, but like, and we both came to the same conclusion. It's like, oh, this guy does go both ways. And yet people think RJ is like, can't go both ways. Tyrese, it seems like, really can only, or is only willing to go one way right now. This is a stretch of play, a pretty long one, where he's not really utilizing the left side of the court. And that also might be, I was looking at his handoffs. They just are not going this year. Like, I don't know if that lack of versatility is affecting it, but yeah, the Pacers, it seems like, have a really big problem with getting into early offense, doing it consistently. I don't know if this is a manifestation of like a lack of buy-in. I don't know if this is just like there are guys out and the guys that they're used to running or like setting the step-up screen or getting into like pitch plays and stuff like that, they're not as attentive. I don't know exactly the reason, but it does, we said it at the start, like the Bizarro Pacers is they're not doing a lot of things that made it work last season. And it's unclear to me what the exact answer is so far, other than like you had your best player was Tyrese Haliburton for a long stretch of time. And that really has not been the case this year. And so much so to the point, like last night he shot 27%. That's going to happen every once in a while. Davion Mitchell has been a really good matchup for him in the past. But these types of performances have not been that far between each other this year. And he's the head of everything that they do. Like he's the reason why they play this way, I think. And if he's not able to be effective within it, then they need to figure out like what it looks like to maximize him, or what it looks like, or ask what's happening with him currently that he can't be in an environment that I think he's had a lot of success before. Yeah. It's kind of a jumbled answer.
No, to borrow an economic term, it's almost like they're battling stagflation. You try to fix the inflation, then you have stagnation. You try to fix the stagnation, then you have inflation. And it kind of feels like it's a negative feedback loop, and that Tyrese does look limited to me. He's obviously had struggles to start the season, and he is the engine that catalyzes this. But there's also been changes in personnel throughout last season, changes in personnel now that are being brought on by injuries, where, it's not just about running fast in transition, but you do need to have active runners. And like, at the beginning of last year when they were in the in-season tournament, Buddy Hield's probably one of the best players in the NBA to run and sprint to the three-point line and run the two-side fast break that the Pacers really want to get to. But that being said, even after they had moved him, they still played fast in the playoffs, and they played fast with the starting lineup that they were playing at the beginning of this year. So that's why I wanted to show the other clip, like just so that people have a little bit better picture of what the Pacers are attempting to do in transition. This is the Eastern Conference Finals against the Celtics. Obi Toppin had grabbed a rebound off a missed free throw from Al Horford and immediately gave it to Tyrese. Even before Al Horford or Obi had given Tyrese the ball, Tyrese has taken a peek, seeing where the hit-ahead outlets are going to be. And Aaron and Andrew are immediately sprinting to the deep corners Miles is the guy in the middle is going to run rim to rim, and then Obi's going to delay and hug to the 45 so that they have the stretch spacing that they want. And then when Obi's spilling to the 45, like in this case, Miles is able to beat people down the floor. The goal of the ball side hit-ahead pass is you want to punch and spray. So they want to play paint to great. That guy's going to dribble push until the defense is forced to stop him. And then you're getting, the 2-on-1 advantage on the backside. And you really ideally want to get 2 closeouts so that you're getting a big advantage shot. In this case, they're going to get a big advantage shot because it's a dunk. But that's the level of coordination that they were showing even against playoff caliber defense. This is down in Orlando where, again, Tyrese had been pressured, so Ben's bringing it up. Miles, as the trailer, is running in front of Ben and, kind of muffling up the penetration angle for Ben. And now you're going to have 4 people on the same side of the floor. I don't know how many times I ever would have seen the Pacers do that last year without somebody rectifying the 3-side situation by the middle player 45 cutting to the opposite corner. Like, there's nobody trying to fix it. Nobody really sprinted to the deep corners anyways. And now they're just going to have to try to go into a random uphill DHO that goes nowhere. And some of this was kind of visible last night in Toronto as well, where Jarus likes to be a grab-and-go player at times, and he's bringing it up. Nobody's at a full-on sprint. This is, light jogging. And then to Enrique Freeman's credit, when you said, he's everywhere and he can be kind of exciting to watch, there are times where the Pacers with Obi, with Pascal, with Enrique will use these high seals, which is good because if you don't have somebody back in the corner, there's nobody to help on the backside of that. But that's creating a really big catch area. But, Jarus isn't really a point guard, so he's not going to throw it over the top there. And now it's just like the offense is slowing down to a crawl again. So it kind of comes back to a place of they have several people on this roster who need to play one style, and there are other people on this roster who need to play another style, and it feels like they're having to do a lot of problem solving to blend the two together while also obviously dealing with the fact that, 2 of the people who are running really hard in the possession against Boston have been hurt for several games now.
So who do you think's tough to fit right now?
Pascal was very effective in Dallas, and so was Obi at doing what Enrique just did. Dallas was giving up tons of cross matches with Kyrie and Luka, which was allowing Pascal to put in early work, just as you would have seen him do a lot in Toronto. But if they don't get those early post touches, then you're not putting the same amount of tension as the Pacers would have had last year. Also, Mathurin's been incredibly efficient as a scorer, but he is a catch-and-hold player. Jarus Walker can make very fast secondary connective passing reads, but like what I showed with that possession against Jakob Poeltl, sometimes when he's catching it and he has to decide what he's going to do against a closeout, there can be a little bit of delay there that's then forcing them deeper into the clock. All those people were on the team last year, but they were never playing on the team at the same time last year. And stylistically, they're a little bit different than how Obi's going to play at the 4 spot. How Tyrese would be playing if he wasn't being face guarded and not being able to bring up the ball and be able to find, I can find that ball side hit ahead, or I can manipulate it and I can throw the opposite and go early opposite and flip the defense in transition. They don't have that same impact.
So Miles is extremely important to the offensive stuff, is what you're saying. Like he's willing to, he's not just the stretch 5, quote unquote, but he is willing to be a wheel greaser that allows like a lot of the drives to proliferate in early offense. That seems to be your sense of it.
I mean, I don't know that I would say that he's like the linchpin here. I think that you're playing different lineups. It's like I said, like there weren't times last year. Ben was a starter at the beginning of the year and they played fast, but he wasn't playing at the same time as Jarus. He wasn't playing at the same time as Pascal. Ben and Pascal barely overlapped last year, let alone playing starters minutes. Ben got hurt not that long after Pascal came over in the trade. He wasn't in the playoff run. So I think it's more so that they have more of those players. And yeah, like I do think that it matters that, Miles wasn't running the correct route there. Like he's running right in front of Ben's driving angle. And last year he would have been a little bit more, they definitely want the 5-man running the pipe. They want them running middle to middle because then they can flow into secondary offense, whether that's a quick pitch just for him to hit a trailer 3, or that's him to run delay action and get the ball to the other side of the floor. So
a lot of these possessions you're showing are like half-court possessions. And like what's going wrong, and I think they'd be identified as half-court possessions by like whether it's I guess
it's them leaving transition on the cutting room floor, things that could have been transition. aren't turning into transition.
Because their half-court offense has been good this year, like by the metrics that I guess recognize it. But it's just that frequency of transition has gone down so much. And also, like, the, I guess, efficiency in transition looks different because different players are playing in transition now. There's a lot of changes for them. It's hard to, there's just a lot changing. It's hard to pin down exactly what's going on. I have from the outside perspective, I have trouble.
That's why I said I think there's a lot of conflating factors, and early offense is better offense. That's kind of true generally speaking, but it's definitely true for the Pacers. Right now, they're shooting like 31% late in the shot clock. So the deeper they get into it, the worse the offense is going to get. But you also mentioned the drives for the Pacers, and also kind of talking about Tyrese. As you said, Tyrese, 16 points, 5 of 18 from the field, 2 of 9 from 3 last night, 4 assists. I don't really like single game plus minus, but minus 15 the Pacers were when Tyrese was on the floor last night. What are your general thoughts about what you've seen in the games you've watched from Tyrese, what you saw from Tyrese last night? Clearly not looking like the same player from the beginning of last season. I don't even think he looks like the same player who was hampered off the hamstring last season, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, so I'll give not just, I've seen, a few Pacers games this year as well. I'll give my overall thoughts on Tyrese. There's a lack of burst. Truly, and usually that's when that happens to a player. Usually there's something else going on, usually. And not everything about players is communicated. It's their personal stuff, right? But like usually when you see a player, when there's like a noticeable lack of burst, it's something. And his ability to like be bouncy around handoffs and around like those close quarter 2-man actions, I think is really different than when I've seen him at his best. There's like the playmaking isn't as robust because a lot of the familiar reads that he got to make are no longer there. Even just running stuff with Pascal, it's like a difference. It can be efficient, and Pascal has been insanely efficient, and the Pacers have been way better with him on the floor this year, but it's just different. And it seems like a lot of the comfort zones that Tyrese could lean on are no longer there. And one of the biggest aspects of that is his 3-point shooting, where he's typically been like one of the best spot-up players in the NBA. He's been below average this year by some measure. And so you look at all the things like early offense, step-up screens, pitch plays, the darty little 2-man actions where he gets off ball, collects it again, gets going right, for example, where he's more comfortable with the pocket pass, making the spray to both corners, or even going back above the break, going to the floater. Like a million things that have worked for him in the past are either not as accessible to him because of a lack of burst that I don't know the reason is, or because the context of the team is different and he hasn't found those comfortable spots on the floor anymore. Basically what's equaled, and sorry to say this in such like harsh terms, but he's been bad. That's what it looks like to me. That's tough. Well, before the game as well, when I talked to Rick, he said that he thought the officiating, the style of play, was having an effect on Tyrese as well. But as far as I can tell, there's one team that has been called for over-aggressive defense in the NBA this year, and it's been the Raptors, their free throw rate they give up is insane. They foul a ton. This would have been the team for that to manifest against Tyrese, and it just didn't that way. And I think like there's a lot of reasons for why what's happening is happening, and that is that there's only ever going to be a lot of reasons when an all NBA guard is below average. It can just be like, what the hell is going on here sometimes?
Correct. So 3 things kind of stand out. First thing I'll ask is, do you think something looks different about his shot?
The shot, I don't know. Like I saw a video of him. I've seen videos of him warming up. I've watched the in-game stuff. I can't tell. Like I've noticed Pascal stuff because Pascal's stuff are big changes. And I also watched Pascal for years. Tyrese, I haven't noticed anything. I'm curious if you have.
The average speed of his release is faster. And it's been faster since the start of preseason. I think that's in part not necessarily an intended adjustment, as it is, it looks like he's rushing shots to me at times. And I think when the ESPN broadcast did the Pacers-Knicks game, when he really struggled, I want to say that Doris Burke had talked to Drew Hanlon about that after he had watched them play against the Pistons. Probably shouldn't quote me on that, but I do remember something being said along those lines. But the other thing that stands out, which I tweeted this yesterday, is he's averaging 20 points and 8.8 assists at home on 46, 39, 72 shooting splits. On the road, he's averaging 12.6 points on 31, 20, 84 shooting splits. He's like a completely different player on the road versus at home. And something leads me to believe that when he's in and has to fly in a plane and isn't sleeping in his own bed, that the travel might be affecting some of the things that you're noticing with the burst. And I'm just going to say that much and leave that there. But also the other thing that the fan base points out and says a lot, and has been a thing since the start of the season, is he's not playing quote-unquote point guard as much. He's not using as many picks, certainly not as he would have been the first half of last season when the offense really exploded. That changed after Buddy Hield got traded. The numbers dipped down. He was averaging 43 picks per 100 because he was the best movement shooter in the starting lineup. Buddy wasn't there to be a ghost screener anymore. It changed some of his role. You saw that in the playoffs as well. And now it's even lower than that. And the fact that that's continuing even when Andrew has been out for several games, TJ missed the game because he was sick, there's not really a reason to be like, oh, well, they're trying to balance multiple ball handlers. They're trying to be dynamic playing 2 point guards at once. Like his picks are still down and those guys aren't even out there. So I think that a lot of this goes to, why is that a thing that's happening? He's facing a lot more exaggerated coverages. Like I showed people that in my article. What you're seeing from Jalen Suggs and other teams is a lot more than you were seeing at the beginning of last season that he's having to navigate. And I think you and I talked about this. I don't know if you'll remember, probably 2 years ago on your Outside Looking In podcast. You were like, how does Tyrese shake a switch on the perimeter? And we both were like, it probably needs to look more like Steph Curry, right? Where he's beating it with movement, getting off the ball and using a cut to cut in front of the switch rather than trying to be, shifty with the dribble and getting off of it. And that was why they used Buddy as a ghost screener so much, because it forces that big, a little bit of hesitation. Now you're seeing he doesn't have quite the same amount of shakes, so they're having to do it in different ways. So when he's being face guarded, you're seeing them using him off ball more. They're seeing him use counters where, maybe he's running on the other underside of Iverson picks and Andrew's running more of the offense. They're using him trying to quote unquote dominate more as a shooting guard in some of the ways that you would see Steph Curry move. The thing that I would point out to people too is that Tyrese took a lot of advice from Steph when he was at the Olympics. He talked about how much the two of them talked about, what do you do when you get hunted on defense? What do you do when you're dealing with something like that? I'm not saying that is the reason, but I think with some of the coverages that we're seeing, it's led to him playing the point guard role a little bit less, which has diminished some of the dynamic playmaking that everybody's remembering that we're not seeing as often, in addition to the limitations and everything else.
It's a lot of Mathurin. Like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously with injuries, you're going to see that happen, but even still, it seems like we're seeing a ton of Mathurin. And even like, if you go on like Synergy, for example, like Pascal's a lot of spotting up for Pascal.
Yeah.
The interesting stuff we saw in the playoffs or towards the back end of last season, where even in the preseason, where it's like, oh, Pascal is being involved in so much of what's going on. I think that's more muted from what I've seen. And so I'm curious to ask you if the Pacers team is seeing less of Tyrese on ball and less of Pascal on ball. That's curious. Like, what is the big motivator here, and why not? Like, why can't they go to Pascal more often, for example? Why are they choosing other avenues, I suppose?
I think a lot of times it depends on the matchups that are out on the floor, because part of the reason we were seeing that a lot in the playoffs is because Pascal was being guarded by fives, and they wanted Tyrese to be able to go at the five. They did that some. One staple they've been going to later, I don't have clips of this, is they like to use wedge rolls between Pascal and Tyrese late in games. So, it might be Ben Shepherd coming and setting the wedge screen. Hey, like maybe Pascal could slide to the block against Jalen Brunson there. They don't often get that, but then he goes and sets the wedge screen for Tyrese to get downhill. That makes it harder to weak Tyrese because the screen isn't quite, as blatant. That's one two-man interaction that they've seen, but it has been less. Pascal's drives are down by almost half.
Yeah.
He's posted up a little bit more for some of the reasons that we're pointing out here. I think a lot of times, like I said, like in Orlando, it was mainly because Jalen Suggs is guarding Tyrese. Let's let Andrew initiate, and then let's use Andrew and Pascal in actions together because Andrew's getting the weaker assignment. And if Pascal can get a mismatch against Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in the post, we feel good about that possession versus, letting Tyrese try to be kind of like a bird flying into the same glass window over and over again against Jalen Suggs. And it's just different entry points at times. But the Mathurin stuff, like last night, we'll get to it, but I think that had to do with who is guarding Benedict Mathurin in the fourth quarter more than about anything. But a few things about Tyrese before we get to that. Here they're using Tyrese as the back screener because Toronto was using so much high pickup points against the Pacers last night. When Tyrese gets the ball back, you see again, watch his eyes. Is he looking at the basket, Samson?
Jeez. I remember watching that one last night and being like, what the hell is going on here? Because that was a great, that go and catch is great. That's so good. But not if you're going to turn away from the rim like that. He punched the gap and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's super impressive. I do want to point out the fact that Tyrese can make these pirouettes in the air and actually spot and locate the passing avenues on the three-point line. That's an athletic, impressive play to make, but there's just times where you can watch him and it's like he's not even looking at the basket in these spots. And so this shows up almost every game. This was against Miami, first game of the in-season tournament group play the other night. What do you think of this, Samson? Why is he picking up his dribble here? In semi-transition.
That is one thing I really love about Mathurin is just willing to risk it at the rim. I love players who are willing to risk it at the rim. I think it's a tremendous quality to have. It's also what I really love about Grady Dick. Grady Dick is shooting 47% at the rim this year, I think, but he'll take it there. This is something that showed up with Haliburton in fits and starts. I'll never understand it, I don't think.
I think the best way to compare and contrast Tyrese and Ben is that Ben will risk imperfect action and Tyrese prefers perfect inaction.
Sure.
Is kind of how it is a lot of the time with the two of them. But sometimes that's late in the third quarter, and I'm telling you that most of the time Tyrese plays almost the whole first quarter and plays most of the third quarter. By the time he gets to the end of the third quarter, this is in Dallas, you tell me what you think of his movement here at the end of the third quarter in Dallas. Watch him. You think he looks like he has a lot of flexibility on any of this? This is prevalent in a lot of the games that you watch, especially the road games. And the reason I included that one is look at the difference just in Davion Mitchell because to point out, the Pacers don't have Miles Turner. They're playing Enrique Freeman at the 5. He's facing Jakob Poeltl with his back to the basketball for reasons that I don't fully understand. But look at Davion Mitchell. He's using a bump and getting all the way to the rim when he sees that, hey, there's not somebody back there to protect the rim. And yet when I'm watching the Pacers doing this last night, which is something that you texted me, watch Tyrese attacking this closeout after he gets that ball from TJ. Who's protecting the rim here if he had continued to punch it? Jakob is out guarding. He drove purposely at Jakob to get Jakob to help on the drive, but Jakob didn't help all the way down. He didn't smash down there. There's nobody to protect the basket and they don't do anything with it. And now Obi's drive doesn't touch the paint. That's 3 consecutive drives on the same possession where barely 1 foot got in the paint. And now here's Tyrese going to his left, and watch him. He's not going to take a left-handed layup. It's a right-handed runner.
And he missed a read there too. Anyway. Yeah, there's weird stuff happening.
Something's going on here.
It's that passivity at the rim. He was injured during the playoffs. He was injured during the playoffs. He played through stuff. I don't know if I've ever seen Tyrese being super aggressive to the rim in my time watching him. However, I've seen him be more aggressive than that. But that the pivot, the swivel when he was guarding Luka was ooh, holy moly. Rec league.
And I think you're absolutely right. Tyrese has always been pass first. That's the way that he's wired. But he would sell the rim. Even if he didn't take the shot, he would sell the rim and be able to get people to commit. That's why he was so good.
Guard.
That's how he was able to get so effective with the cat and mouse game with the, weak side tagger, the threat of his floater, the threat of the finger roll, the threat of the late lob. Can sow a lot of confusion with that combination. If you're not even looking at the rim on some of these drives and you look hesitant and you look like you don't fully have the flexibility to stop and pop to get to that shot, it's not going to have the same effect, even if you are still the same quality of passer.
LaMelo and Tyrese are two big, like Tyrese is smaller than LaMelo, but they're two big guards who are plagued by the fact that they are not quicker than basically anybody who guards them.
Yeah.
And LaMelo is a guy who has like that brash confidence. He's like, I have some of the best touch in the world, so I'll try anything. Like, I don't care. The ball is going up. And Tyrese does not have that, even though Tyrese, like, not currently, but in the past has seemed like he has some of the best touch in the world, especially relative to like his jump shot mechanics is just like touch, his floater, touch. Yeah, interesting.
And the other thing about him too is that he has a decent change of speed. He's very effective with the Pinoy step, and then also he covers a lot of ground. Like he's not the fastest, but he has very long strides. So when he's at his best and he's using the low gather and willing to punch through, the nail help and get through it, like he can just cover tons of ground. So that's what aids him in that way.
He's scoring like 80% on his twos in transition because those, like, once the defense commits, like his big two steps to punch through. And that's why I was so disappointed that he passed out of that 45, like that stampede cut. It's like, damn, dude, like you can clear space if you want to.
Or the 2-on-1 last night where he didn't go to the rim and he circled back out and took the
oh, gee, yeah. There's just like, again, always been more passive than a lot of high scoring guards at the rim, but not this passive. This is unique.
Do you want to talk about the other guard in the starting lineup? Benedict Mathurin had 17 points in the fourth quarter. RJ Barrett also had a massive fourth quarter for the Raptors. It kind of felt like
the name is Star J. You'll address him as such.
He was really good last night. Turns out, I don't remember if it was you or if it was Benji who once told me in a podcast that RJ Barrett drives and plays like a snowplow. Is that you?
Oh, maybe.
Okay, because I couldn't get that image out of my head last night when I was watching him. He was that effective.
That sounds like something I'd say, but I don't want to take something from Benji because I don't remember exactly.
He had 22.3 drives per 100 last night and scored 1.412 points per chance on those drives.
So I talked to him yesterday because shortly after he got traded to the Raptors, I asked him about, like, we're seeing all these changes in your game, it seems. And he was like, nope, I haven't changed at all. And so last night I asked him, like, hey, you've actually been one of the best, like, pick and roll passers in the NBA.
This had a behind the back pocket pass.
Oh, he's so sick with it. Like, his pacing is really good. His last step to finish is really good.
And his ability to use his body with the hostage dribble.
Yes.
And wall guys off is quite good with the pacing as well.
And so I asked him about that. He's like, nope, always been a part of my game. So I was like, okay, well, and this is a little bit, I was baiting the Tom Thibodeau slander. I was like, since this stuff has always been part of your game, what's it like having to wait to show it off? And he's like, you see me? I'm very happy, man. He kept it very short. But yeah, anyway, enough about RJ, who's been really fun.
No, we need to talk about RJ because I want to know, I brought him up for a very specific reason. First of all, what did you think about the Pacers' defense against him as they continue to have struggles guarding bigger wings? And we're also going to talk about some of his processing on drives too, as a contrast to Mathurin as well.
Okay, so it's hard to climb Jakob Poeltl as a screen. Jakob, the reason why, like partly why RJ is doing so well in the pick and roll is because Jakob Poeltl will carve out gobs of space for him and will perfectly time the roll next to him and will present a massive catch radius and has the swing step through, then use the dribble, uses his feet perfectly to elevate his finishing. Like, all that stuff is
I don't know if I've ever seen somebody roll with their chest mirrored at an angle straight to the ball quite like Jakob Poeltl.
This is something I talk about all the time. It's a very unique aspect of his rolling, and it makes him, like, I think he has the biggest pocket pass catch radius in the NBA. You could throw it anywhere, he will collect it. It's a very unique aspect of who he is, and the fact that like his timing on his pivot is so good to be chest facing, catch, swing, step through,
Yep.
then put the ball down. Like it's a dance. And I asked Jakob about this years ago, and he was like, "Why are you talking about my feet, dude? I like it's end of season presser. I don't want to talk about my footwork right now." However, the point of attack stuff, like everyone died. Like the Pacers just were like, yes, you will have a 2-on-1 as you so choose. Here it comes. Like it's
Wait,
available.
so are you telling me that Andrew and Ben Shepherd might be important to
They're
point of
so
attack?
important. They're really important. Pascal, we've talked about his woes defensively, and like how it's changed over the years, but he's having a super positive effect on the defense with Indiana. And it's not because he's like, oh man, I'm the best defender around. It's because like context really matters, and being able to play certain styles of defense really matters. And as it currently stands, I don't think the Pacers are equipped to guard the pick and roll like the way that they were, which is tough. And RJ Barrett was like, I'm going to eat off of this plate for 39 points and 5 assists. And he did.
And Pascal's defense on the whole, I think his defense has been better, especially than like right before the All-Star break last year. And even probably than what we saw in the playoffs. He's made some more, this is going to sound really rudimentary, but he's made some more hustle plays in combination with like, oh, I'm recognizing that I should pre-switch Tyrese out of this matchup. I'm really using my length to keep the ball in the perimeter. I had some really impressive possessions switching out to Tyrese Maxey in the game against Philly. I was like, oh, wow, he's actually able to, corral that degree of on-ball speed and then, actually diving on the floor, which, again, this sounds very rudimentary, but it's not guaranteed on this roster that the Pacers will play consistently hard and go get loose balls.
He had a couple good possessions pressuring RJ as well. Like we're like, oh, okay.
I was going to agree with you in that the Pacers do not run ice coverage basically at all. Like that got almost eliminated from their defensive package 2 years ago, but they were trying to, force RJ to his right onside pick and rolls, as most teams will. And it was very confusing for me because there was a few times where Pascal has his back to the screener, but it's like you're not actually forcing and using your body to force RJ away from the screen. So RJ was just like, oh, you're just going to stand there and let yourself be screened? I just got to dribble downhill with my left anyways. And it's like, And then he had the really impressive one in the fourth quarter, which impressive footwork, not so impressive defense where the Pacers switched on the guard screens and he had that step through the switch and still got back to his left. But
that's the thing. He drives right. He gets back. It's on the right side of the rim, but he gets back to that left quite often.
Yeah. And then also the matter too is, and I want to get your thoughts here on this one too, because he had the bump against Jarus Walker on the one possession in the first half. And Jarus really kind of struggles at times to absorb a bump and then stay vertical with his contests. So Jarus, you didn't get to see much Jarus last year because he really wasn't in the rotation. You didn't play for the Pacers in the playoffs. You saw him in person last night. Like what were your thoughts about him on both sides of the ball?
I wasn't whelmed. It was
a rough one. It was a rough one.
I was underwhelmed. And like Jarus, you brought it up earlier, and we've talked about Jarus a decent amount, I think, quite frankly. Those secondary reads can be quite quick, like that, tiptoe catch, scan, pass can be quite good. Like there's some shooting upside there with his size that can be like, he has an interesting dribble, like, there's push, there's like pick up and go stuff. There's a bunch of things that are currently trying to manifest at the NBA level that you think it's easy to see why it would be good. But there's also a bunch of other things, like Pascal has the talent to be a guy who doesn't really stick screens, but does a certain type of screen. But like Jarus, I don't know if he should be playing that way right now. There are a lot of players who they get the fundamentals down of being secondary and tertiary before they get their chance to take, star possessions. And last night, it seemed like Jarus was like a star possession guy without the star skills. And that's not every game for him, but it's just like, it didn't seem like he was operating in an efficient manner within the offense or within his own game. And that's tough.
The thing about Jarus is because he's playing at the small forward spot, because that's where the minutes are for him on the roster. He's really made strides with his shot. Like if you had seen him shooting in summer league as a rookie and in preseason as a rookie, he had 2 hitches and he was leaning to his left on the shot a lot. He's shooting the heck out of the ball right now, especially on just like, corner threes, spot up threes where he has time to line it up. Been very effective in that regard. The problem is, and I talked to our mutual friend Polar about this briefly and a couple times, is that he plays with an extra pep in his step when he gets to bring the ball up the floor and he gets to do more as a handler. He has played point guard in high school in the past. But as I've said before, his physicality doesn't really match his physique, in part because he really struggles to shed pressure. And this is what Polar has said to me, is that he doesn't ground his feet. He doesn't use the soles of his feet that well. So his balance and his stability, like what I'm talking about on defense, when he can't really absorb a bump, also shows up on offense. And that's leading to awkward takeoff points. It's leading to him to have to rely way too much on finesse, which is a problem if you're on the left side of the basket and then you're having to take a floater against the grain of your body because you can't, ground your feet enough to be able to get on the drive. And that's what's leading to some of the awkward offensive stuff, in addition to just like, make the right read against a closeout. Hopefully that comes with time where you're, shooting the open shot that comes to you rather than dribbling into a worse shot. But yeah, I mean, there were some pretty rough moments for him in the game that you saw. There's
still, and like that wasn't the most glowing assessment, and I don't mean to be rude or anything, but I still see, like, for Pacers fans who look at Jarus and are excited, there's lots of stuff to be excited about, and like
his hands are incredible.
Yeah,
his hands defensively are incredible.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there, and like it takes guys time, like it just takes time.
The reason, to back up, why I wanted to bring up RJ Barrett in conjunction with Benedict Mathurin, and I'll show you the clips here, is from the fourth quarter. And first question for you, why do you think that Grady Dick was guarding Benedict Mathurin for almost the entire fourth quarter of this basketball game? And was it like a stealthy tank job that didn't work out for them, or exactly what was going on?
So there's this thing where Darko, he said it to me a couple of weeks ago. He's like, I want Grady to guard every player 1 through 4 in the NBA. There is no hiding in this league. And Grady, like, if you saw it, like, he's guarded Cade. Like, they do trial by fire with Grady. They want, like, they see the upside of Grady's defense. And so they know, like, whether that matches perfectly with quote-unquote stealth tank job, I don't know. But they know Grady will have to, for this team in the future, he has to be, like, not a plus defender, but they want him eventually with his size to be, like, above average. They want that desperately. So they send him out there every game to run the 5th most miles in the NBA on offense, to be involved in everything. And then they say, like, take this matchup on defense. And so, I'm sure there's a few different motivations, but a lot of it is just like, nope, our guys are going to guard, and Grady has to do it too. And so we're seeing it here.
It's just like wild to me, though, that you would do that in the fourth quarter of crunch time when you've only won 2 basketball games.
Winners work, baby.
You're in positions to win, and you decided to put him on the person who was having, the hottest scoring run on the opposing team when he could have been guarding TJ McConnell off ball. He could have been guarding Obi Toppin.
Mathurin, and
they put him on Mathurin.
He is the exact type of player who punishes Grady's weaknesses, by the way. Like, outside of a star, you couldn't draw up the type of player. I guess like RJ Barrett would also punish Grady like a ton. Mm-hmm. It's hard to drop a guy other than Mathurin who would be like a secondary player who just puts Grady in hell. But we saw it.
And this is the next question I want to ask. So when you were in Mexico last year, I told you that I have like a nerdy obsession with watching closeout techniques. And we talked briefly about Grady, and you told me that you were at a game and that they were working on him chopping his feet. And I was like, why in the heck are they working with him on chopping his feet? That's a very outdated technique. And you were like, I don't know, but that's what they're doing pregame. So I ask you, Samson, what are they wanting him to do with this closeout technique now? Because this is not good. This is quite poor.
He's a sprint stop now. Like the way that they worked at chopping feet last year.
It feels like he's caught between two worlds to me.
On that play, yes. He is, and there's been some sprint stops where he is like cartoonishly overshot the stop. Like he's sometimes like he He's had some okay games as far as like closeouts go. But yes, they no longer work on the chop. He's a sprint stopper now in his pregame warmups. So he is caught in between two worlds, I think, truly. But they're looking to rectify. I don't know if last year was a mistake. I don't know if they're like, we want you doing both. I don't know what they want from him exactly, but he practices the sprint stop now. And obviously that was like a mix.
Benedict Mathurin scored 80 points per 100 half-court matchups against Grady last night. So
better than 100, at least, you know.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. But TJ McConnell gets put in the dunker spot here, so that I think that's Agbaji there ends up being the secondary rim protector. And this is the next point that I wanted to bring up, is that in conjunction with RJ, is that a lot of times you see Ben, and like this is probably fine because this is a guard as the secondary rim protector, which is why the Pacers go to these alignments as much as they do. But I think if that's a big standing in the dunker spot, we would all be going like, Ben, why didn't you throw the lay down pass here? And why are you trying to score up through the physicality of this? But Ben has incredible core strength, very, very good, pretty exquisite at dragging the toe and decelerating. He's a really good second thrust player. He can get to his Euro step, he can get to the stride stop, the jump stop, and then he can pivot out of that. And it allows for a lot of creative finishes for him. It's kind of similar. They're not similar players overall, but that's kind of how I look at Franz Wagner with his finishing footwork around the rim too. You catch the first step, it doesn't really matter because they're going to be able to get to another move. Ben is very good at that too. So it leads him to have more confidence to continue making plays like that on occasion. And he's finishing, he's at, 69% at the rim right now this season. He's making more threes than ever. He's getting more free throw attempts than ever. And his field goal percentage at the rim is better than ever. And yet this was that step through from RJ against that Spain coverage that we talked about before when Ben was guarding RJ, which just to let people know, since I just exposed Grady Dick, RJ scored 77.7 points per 100 half-court matchups when he was guarded by Mathurin in this game. So point being, Ben, I find a lot of times with Ben, he's only attempting 2.7 three-point attempts per game, despite the fact that he's shooting over 40% from them. If you're just looking at this as a static screenshot, would you think this would be a three-point attempt?
Yeah.
Yeah, you would think.
Or a swing.
But Ben doesn't often take – his first inclination is he's very wired to catch and drive first and catch and shoot second, despite the fact that he's shooting the three better. And then there was a few times in this game where you could see Pascal is getting a little bit frustrated because like he has a mismatch against Grady there. He never touches the ball, which Ben ends up making a contested three. But again, like the read there he just tries to bust through the help despite the fact that Jarus is open at the top of the break. Like there's still some read issues from him here. So to finally get to my long-winded point about Benedict Mathurin and RJ is that Ben passes on 24.5% of his drives. RJ Barrett this season for the Raptors is passing on 39.8% of his drives, which is up from 36% with the Raptors last year and just 26.7% with the Knicks. So how important do you think it's been to RJ Barrett that he's become a more frequent passer in terms of what his finishing is at the rim?
It's like absolutely essential. The guys who pass that little at like out of drives are like Zion Williamson and Kyrie Irving. And you have to be like and Grady, which is pretty funny.
Grady's at 24% as well.
Yeah. Grady has a different MO than Mathurin does for sure, and they're different players. Mathurin can help himself a lot, especially since he is so comfortable, like with his feet. Like that, he's talented at. You talked about like Jarus not using the soles of his feet. Like Ben, it seems like his extend down to hell sometimes, like to anchor himself and get to different places. For real. That is a real asset as a passer in the lane. Like that can really elevate the types of reads your body is able to make. You just got to get the brain to start making some of those reads. And like you gave a great example of that when TJ was in the dunker spot. Like if this is a big man, Ben is probably still going like chest to chest, even if it's like Rudy Gobert. He's like, I'm going to take it. I'm going to see what happens. But a lay down could be so much more rewarding. RJ has gotten so good at not just straight line middle of like not just taking these straight line drives, but segmenting his drives, being comfortable in different spots, restarting his drive in different places. And like you talked about putting people in jail, but even attacking closeouts, there can be like two aspects of his drive where he slows down, surveys. RJ can make the skip with both hands. RJ is perfectly comfortable with laydown. He's very comfortable with the left-handed wrap, which is like a really great pass for him, whether it's to the opposing corner, like through the baseline, or whether he's finding the dunker spot as he brings two to the back of the rim with him. Like, there's a lot of passes he's able to make. And as far as I can tell, like Benedict Mathurin does not have that many passes in his toolkit right now. But he has the flexibility, he has the physicality, he has like so many aspects of how he plays basketball that it's easy to see like this guy could be a really great passer. We see two guards who don't pass that well. If they get enough reps in the NBA, that is one of the most dependable things, is like talented two guards can learn to pass. Mathurin doesn't pass, really. I would love to see it. I think it could elevate his game like significantly.
The thing that you'll notice with Ben is it's very rare that he makes a pass on a drive off of movement. He had a really impressive one in New Orleans where he drew a double and found Obi in the left corner, but that's another one. He, as you saw on that drive against Grady Dick, and as you saw on the one where he passed up the three, he wants to play out a triple threat, and he prefers the jab and go to his left. He wants to rip baseline to his left. He doesn't have the offhand passing. He has to come to a jump stop, and then he has to play off of 2 feet, scan and survey, find that passing outlet. There's times where he's been a little bit more deliberate with it, I think, but it's kind of wild that a person's shooting 69% at the rim and has a 24% pass out rate. There's some that you'll watch. If you watch all of his drives and you see the amount of help he's seeing on his drives, because teams know this about him. Teams know he's not super apt to pass, so he sees help on his drives like 74% of the time. He's muscling it through. Like you said that before, like, oh, if there would have been a big in the dunker spot, like he literally did this in Dallas and used his core strength to score over a big, despite the fact that there was 2 bodies there. I don't know how sustainable overall I feel that is in the long run. Maybe it is, because like I said, he's very impressive and exquisite with his footwork around the basket. But the main point here,
if you're not adaptable, like the solve comes on defense. Like the bill comes due for anybody who is a reckless driver. And it could be Jalen Brunson taking a charge. It can look a lot of different ways. That versatility as a driver is, I think, like paramount to his success.
And, they didn't have, in addition to this, they didn't have Andrew, they didn't have Neesmith, they didn't have Ben Shepherd. That's 3 of their best 4 perimeter defenders. And then, to make matters worse, they don't have their best and only current rim protector on the roster to make up for what they're losing with the perimeter defense. So, number to throw out there to you, the Pacers have been outscored by 6.32 points in 330 minutes played with Ben and Tyrese on the floor together this season. Opponents are scoring 120 points per 100 with the 2 of them out there, which would be the equivalent of the worst defense in the NBA. That's not all on them, obviously. You don't want to get too held up with 2-man combinations in this setting, but this is true for the entirety of since Ben was drafted, that they have not won the minutes with Tyrese and Ben on the floor. They did not win the minutes with the 2 of them on the floor last year, and that's not to say that either of them, Tyrese has struggled with his own individual efficiency. Ben has been very efficient. It's not to say that either of them and their styles that they play are bad or wrong, but they are so stylistically different from each other. And because of what both of their weaknesses are on defense, what do you think of this as a pairing?
You and I have raved about the pairing of Nembhard and Tyrese because there's a lot of inherent strengths there. This is where, like, Mathurin, it's very easy. Like, obviously, Nembhard had an incredible, like, Eastern Conference Finals, and there are many players in the NBA who will never touch that series as far as, like, the level of play. But, like, Nembhard can get, like, caught in the shuffle, and, like, the game can pass him by a little bit sometimes, and, like, there can be weird trends. But, like, Mathurin, as far as, like, the talent aspect, the size aspect, like, the willingness to just, like, imprint the game, he's so loud. He's very loud. But as you say, like, it's easier now because Tyrese is struggling so much.
Right.
But if Tyrese finds it again, then you're going to have to look at it. As efficient as Mathurin is right now, the overall like Tyrese engine stuff will eclipse what Mathurin is doing for looking up for his own offense. And that's where, like, push comes to shove, Mathurin either has to be like a more expansive playmaker, or he has to be a quicker decision maker getting to his own offense. Because as impressive as he has been, he's impressive on like what's currently a middling team, and he's impressive in like it's very one note, and that doesn't mean like, okay, this guy is everything now. It means, okay, so we have this really good thing that we can build off of. And so whether or not they fit, I mean, we're seeing like, I don't think they fit very well right now. They're both young. Like, players can change, things can become strengths, other things can, like, weaknesses can become passable. Mathurin is performing well enough that you start to think about like, okay, what can this look like? How do we experiment further so that we get more info on what works and what doesn't, and what both players are malleable about that maybe they haven't been in the past? Like, that's what I think when I see them. But as far as like, I don't know, the platonic, do they fit well? I don't think they are a very strong fit. But Mathurin, like, Tyrese is an all-NBA guard, has been selected to it, I think, right?
Yeah, they won the minutes against the New York Knicks when they both scored. They both scored over 30 points. The two of them and Miles combined for 99 points, the three of them together. But in that game, they gave up, I believe, 133 points when the two of them were on the floor. So they needed the explosivity of their offense in order to make up with that, because still having some of those issues on the other end. Though I will say that if people go read the article that I wrote, Ben did make some decent improvements going from the first game against Miami to the second game against Miami that I pointed out and showed after I was very critical of their defense in the first game. So, I mean, I guess my thinking on it is, and people questioned me about this a little bit over the summer, if Mathurin is going to remain a starter, and to his credit, he's also something we didn't bring up. He's been a fantastic rebounder for them ever since he got pulled from the game against Philly because he wasn't rebounding. He's really upped his rebounding defensive numbers there. There's been games where he's led the team in defensive rebounding. This is not a good defensive rebounding team, so that does matter. Is that if he's going to remain a starter, I think it makes more sense for him to be starting in place of Nesmith than it does Andrew Nembhard. Because I asked you, why do you think Grady's guarding Benedict Mathurin? And the reason that you gave is probably the correct one, because obviously you know way more about Darko's intentions than me. But there's times where Luka is guarding Benedict Mathurin at the end of a game, and Jalen Brunson is guarding Benedict Mathurin, and that's a very favorable matchup for the Pacers, and it gives them somebody who can poke at the opposing team's, weak link star player. And if you can't guard that star player, at least you're forcing them to have to guard, which isn't something that Nesmith kind of regularly does. And I think part of the reason they do that is if you're starting Tyrese and Andrew together and Pascal and Miles are out there and you have Jalen Brunson, Tom Thibodeau doesn't want Jalen Brunson guarding over on picks. And because the Pacers have 2 point guards out there, you're not going to put him on Andrew and you're not going to put him on Tyrese because they don't want him navigating on-ball situations. Likewise, you're obviously not going to hide him on Pascal Siakam, which is a mismatch, and you're not going to put him on Miles Turner either because Miles Turner's Tyrese's most frequent scorer, and I would hope that Miles can score over the top of Jalen Brunson in the post. So that leaves Benedict Mathurin, and Benedict Mathurin's very effective at poking at weak links far more than what you're going to see from Nesmith. So that's kind of the way that I see it, and if they're going to continue to experiment with it, obviously, because Ben is super talented and they want to find out, like, how can we make this work? It's just that right now it feels stylistically that they're trying to balance two different styles, and as long as Tyrese is in his more limited state, Tyrese is more capable of adjusting his game to play a different style than currently Ben is capable of adjusting his game to play the high pace, quick decision-making, random offense that the Pacers were playing in the playoffs. So that's kind of where you land.
It's interesting when like the player with the higher ceiling is the more malleable one. Because usually we don't think of like, nobody thinks of team building in that way. You think like, well, the guy who's like the big, fantastic player is the one who like you go to everything that they want to do. And like you see the Mavericks do that, for example, with Luka. You've seen Giannis is not a player who typically like acquiesces to other forms of play. But sometimes there are like uber talented players who acquiesce.
Devin Booker.
Yeah.
Devin Booker can do this.
Yeah. It's interesting because we think of it kind of in one way, but it's very hard to predict how it'll actually shake out.
And some of this is being dictated by the way that Tyrese is playing. Like I said, it kind of feels like a negative feedback loop of which one is leading to which thing. But other thing, broader topic that I wanted to zoom out and talk about, because both of these teams played a ton of full court pressure last night. Both teams are known for playing a lot of full court pressure. I wanted to get your overall opinion on why do you think both of these teams and league as a whole, just to give people a reference point, the Toronto Raptors' average pickup point on defense is 49.2 feet. That ranks fourth in the NBA. The Pacers is at 48 feet, which ranks fifth, and the league as a whole is at 42.5 compared to 39 a year ago. So the league as a whole is skewing more towards higher pickup points, full court pressure. Why do you think that is, and what have you thought of the Raptors implementing that for their defense this year? Also what you saw of the Pacers doing this, because sorry to interrupt, I should have added in here. The Pacers played more full court pressure defense during their playoff run than any team in Synergy's 15-year database. Tons of ball pressure being applied by the Pacers, and now you're seeing that with your Raptors. Continue.
Yeah, I think lead playmakers are too talented when you allow them to do it on their own terms. Higher pickup points means that you can impose your will if you have good defenders, and this is what you're hoping for, is that you can guide the offense into different looks and marginally different spaces where they start plays, and you can make them do it. You talked about, like, why are the Pacers shooting so many shots in the back half of or in like the last however much seconds of the shot clock is a defender, and having, especially since teams work so hard and there's so much more motion in the NBA, having teams run less actions and like not giving them the full clock to run so many different things and make your team maybe it's easier to compete at the front end of the shot clock and ask a guy to do it and to do it team wide than it is to compete, 5 guys wide at the back end. I think it's just about applying pressure. It's about getting a foothold defensively. And while I don't think the Raptors have been particularly good at it, I think that is the motivation, is to be able to affect change more often instead of being constantly reactive.
Both of these teams are bottom 10 in forcing opponent turnovers. So that doesn't really give you a strong reason to continue doing it. Last night, the Raptors pressured the Pacers a lot, and they also gave up more points per chance last night just in that game when they pressured the Pacers than when they didn't. That being said, there can be a cumulative effect of this throughout the game, and that, yes, you might be giving up an odd man advantage or, whatever else, a straight line drive because you pressured, but you're also wearing down the ball handlers that are constantly having to deal with it throughout the course of a game, where it's not just about that one specific number. But, I told you many times during the playoff run, I was like, if the matchup is Obi guarding Drew Holiday or Pascal Siakam guarding Drew Holiday, do you still have to pick up full court and give up, they get beat? Now you're already automatically outnumbered 70 feet from the basket. I understood why they were doing it against a more limited opponent in the Milwaukee Bucks, against a more limited opponent with Jalen Brunson as, the sun, the moon, and the stars for the New York Knicks. It didn't always make as much sense to me against Boston. And that caused me to ask a lot of questions about why exactly were they doing this beyond just masking flaws in the half court. And to counter what I just said, they allowed a little bit less points when they had a backcourt defender in the playoffs. Like, it was a slight improvement over not doing it, but it was still like 23rd by comparison to regular defenses. So I don't know if you saw the thread that I made about this, but I do now know why they were doing it.
I didn't see this thread.
Okay, so, and I wonder if this applies to the Raptors as well, which is why I wanted to talk about this. I talked to somebody within the league, and I was like, numbers-wise, it doesn't really make a ton of sense. Like, they're giving up more points, and they're like, you can't look at the defensive numbers, especially for a team like the Pacers. And I also had somebody ahead of the playoffs ask me, do you think the Pacers will play full court pressure defense? And I said, well, they do it a lot with TJ and Andrew Nembhard. So, just unleashing the two of them, most likely, yes. And I said, they're starting to do a little bit more, but I can't see doing it full scale. Turns out that person was right, and they did it full scale. And the reason they thought that they would do it is to artificially create pace in the playoffs. And it was much more about maintaining their play style and what they did offensively than it necessarily was about what they were doing defensively. And this has been talked about behind the scenes, that like if you look at it, the Pacers had a faster average time to cross half court, despite the cliche the game slows down in the playoffs. They were faster getting across half court in the postseason than they were in the regular season, and they were really freaking fast at doing it during the regular season, in part because if you have, one backcourt defender and you're taking the ball out of the net, or you're getting a stop, or you're forcing a turnover or whatever, they were already moving up the court, which aided their momentum. It's the reverse of what Tyrese talked about last year, where it was incredible because they were playing at such a fast pace and they were never turning the ball over. And he was like, we have to take care of the ball, because if we have a live ball turnover, it's basically, game over for us, because we're moving so fast offensively. We can't quickly change speeds to get back defensively to protect against the turnover. And this case for the Pacers, when they're applying pressure at 94 feet and they want to be a team that's constantly on the run, they already have a player back there. So I made this thread and talked about it, showing the numbers. And Shamit Dua, who you've podcasted with, talked to the Pelicans about this and said, hey, what do you think about this? Asked Willie Green. He's like, yeah, there's a direct correlation. That's a big reason why you're doing it, because it's feeding your offensive momentum.
No leakouts, just defensive pressure. That's interesting.
And at times, like if you were watching him, because I remember I asked you on a possession when we were doing the Bucks series, where I was like, maybe this is galaxy brain, but do you think they're going over on a screen 80 feet from the basket because they intentionally want to get the Bucks to play faster and to be able to play at the pace that they want to play at? And some of it was.
This is, there are not two sides to the court. It is one court. Mm-hmm. There's just one court. It's just basketball. That's interesting. I've not thought about it that way, but I guess that makes sense. Like
I thought I might have been able to intrigue you with my summer thread. That was one of my think pieces that I made over.
No, that's very interesting.
So I just wondered if that was something that the Raptors had talked about, since they also, kind of stylistically, the Raptors are playing fairly similar to many of the things the Pacers were doing a year ago. Which, as it turns out, the Pacers are still playing full court pressure, and they're not really playing as fast right now, but for reasons that we already talked about.
I wonder if this will be if we'll see this manifest a little bit more once Scottie is back for hit-ahead passes and stuff like that.
Yeah, because another thing is that the league as a whole, the Pacers' average time to shoot is almost the same as last year, but they rank 10th or 11th because so many teams are so fast now.
Yeah. Yeah, the NBA is fast right now.
I just was going to show you a quick example of the ball pressure from the Raptors here. This is the Pacers are running. This is a set that they run. They call this slice, and they're running their play at 3/4 court. So basically, it's a ram screen into a double drag where Tyrese skips it to the elbow, and then that turns into a get action, or basically a rip DHO in a way for him to get downhill. And then for whatever reason, he doesn't want to test Pirtle in that drop, despite the fact that Enrique Freeman went to the quick out. But a lot of times they'll get that skip, and because they had to run it so high up the court, that's a longer skip to the opposite corner, hang time pass that Obi has to get in the air to catch. The Raptors are able to recover back out of it, and now Quentin Jackson's not really known as a shooter. But just to show the difference, this is against Dennis Schroeder in Brooklyn last year, and now the Pacers are running it at the logo, which now it's truthfully a half-court set, and you see the difference when Tyrese is able to get downhill out of it. They run this all the time. So it just kind of stood out to me when I was watching it and thinking, obviously the Raptors defense is not good, but if you can get a team and just watching the Pacers too, get more momentum in their sets, and what you just said, there's only one side of the floor, they're running, just watching them run a half-court set when it's being run in the backcourt is where they're starting the offense.
That's interesting.
I'm glad I was able to intrigue you with this topic.
No, I've been intrigued. I'll ask Darko about this,
because I did the podcast with Jenny too, and talked to her about more teams running wide. Nick Nurse did this with the Raptors. He went and watched Canadian football, which I've never watched the Canadian Football League, but the line of scrimmage and the amount of movement that you're able to use pre-snap was something that he drew influence from, because I guess he and his coaching staff went and watched an Argonauts game, and Jenny played flag football. And in the game set that they used in that play, she talked about, we want to be able to run more full court plays where you're getting that motion because of how much harder it is to handle. So there's more teams now that are running, basic wide, but it's being set. So it's almost like you're running a route as a football player rather than it's static, just straight horizontal with the guy coming off of it.
I've watched a lot of CFL football.
Have you?
Basically, where I grew up, like I think it's like the majority of the, I guess, money or the majority of the merchandise that is sold in the CFL comes from one team, the Saskatchewan Roughriders, because that was for the longest time the only professional sports team in Saskatchewan, and so it's like it has like NFL level fanfare for that team, and so I saw a lot of CFL growing up. I watched the Grey Cup in Regina in 2013 when the Roughriders won. It was fun, but I didn't watch it and think, how could I import this or like plug this into basketball? That's very
Nick Nurse and Jenny Busick did, but I mean, I can see that I've really drawn you in with my work from this summer, given that was a whole 40-minute podcast that I talked to an NBA coach about Canadian football and then how that could be imported to the NBA.
It's elite.
Along with my thread, you were really enthralled by that stuff that I posted on the internet. I can see, but yeah. So I think that was mainly it. Other than, do you want me to share the hot take that I have about the Toronto Raptors offense, or would you like me to do that in private at another time?
No, I want the hot take here, live on air.
I think that sometimes when I watch the Raptors on offense, and I asked you this in your mailbag question about the Dan Hurley play, it's like I'm reading a Jane Austen novel. Have you read a Jane Austen? Have you read Pride and Prejudice? Have you read Sense and Sensibility?
No, I watched the Pride and Prejudice movie. I thought it was pretty good.
Okay, so when you read Jane Austen, no disrespect to Jane Austen, I'm not a huge fan.
Oh, you know what's happening. You know what's coming. Is this?
Oh, no. The dialogue is very hard to follow. And sometimes when I'm reading it, I feel like I'm, trying to navigate a hedge maze where I'm having to chop through it. And it's like, I don't need all of this. Like, just get to the purpose. The writing is very thick, is the way that I would put it when you read her. And sometimes I feel like the Raptors have a lot of excess fluff and things where there's like tons of movement. And aesthetically, it's like, wow, that was really pretty to watch. But it's like they just got to pull up two out of all of that movement, and they totally missed the part where the tension actually was. Or why do you need to set all those extra looping screens to get to the main point when you could just get to the main point? Does this resonate with you?
So what you don't realize is that Darko has Twitter. So when he makes a beautiful set, he can log on and see people calling him a genius. Don't you realize? With the Dan Hurley play, I thought that. Like, I was like, oh, this is like a
I
really
have more
fun set.
examples.
Well, yeah, of course. There's...
No, I mean, I've actually clipped them to show them to you.
Oh, great.
I have
okay,
examples.
then I would love to see it. Yes.
Okay. I just think that there's some extra fluff going on here, and I want your opinion. So what has happened is Grady's looping around the screen at the free throw line. He had flipped the ball to Davion Mitchell. And he's going to loop around it and become the first screener of a stagger for Chris Boucher, who we know is not going to come off of a stagger. He's going to reject it, and then it virtually becomes like twirl for Grady to go back to the ball and get it there, curling back toward the basket. In this case, because he got knocked off his spot a little bit, it becomes, empty side pick and roll. Mogo gets it, and then he ends up missing like a push shot in the lane. The reason I brought that up is I was watching that play when they ran it last night. And now here are the Pacers running virtually the same thing, but watch the difference. So Jarus makes that same flip to TJ, and he's going to curl around that off-ball screen just like Grady did. But watch Ben. This is a scripted cut from Ben, although he times it quite well. They want him in that weak side corner, and then he cuts at the point in time when Jarus is making that curl and catches the pass so that they can remove the tagger and make them have to make a choice between either follow Ben or stop Jarus at the rim. They're cutting out all that extra stuff with Grady and the stagger. You could just get Grady curling to the basket and remove the backside tagger rather than doing all that extra stuff. So here's another look. This is from like 2 years ago. Aaron Nesmith making that same curl again. They've taken the weak side cutter and just had them run baseline. Now there's nothing there, so Aaron gets a dunk. Or another thing they'll do, like if the cutters guy slides under the pick and you're not going to be able to get that lob, is then they dot both corners and they'll automatically go up there, set that high wide screen so that they can just flow into Spain reject or wide reject Spain and get Spain pick and roll. And now you're at a lob. There's a clearer path to being able to get from one action to the next action versus when I'm watching this and I watch some of the other offense that they run. And I know some of this is being dictated by the fact that they don't have Scotty. They don't have Emmanuel quickly. They're having to run plays to get RJ and Grady into advantageous positions. But this doesn't feel like it's an advantageous position to me. It feels like you're just kind of running some off-ball actions to force guys to run for the sake of getting in like extra cardio. And this isn't really like, what are your thoughts here, Samson?
So the play where Jarus like comes off the flare, this one,
yeah,
and then
and
turns
Ben
it downhill.
runs to the corner. Yep.
Yeah. The Raptors run something very similar. Like Grady has gotten a couple layups out of it, and Grady can take that flare and he can turn it downhill, and it can become Spain as well, like Spain leak. The Raptors run that play. The reason why I think they kind of like dressed up that other play is perhaps because they don't want the Pacers to like gear up on Grady. You know, like Mathurin, like Grady gets clearance there and they get to run that action, which actually, if Mobo catches a little bit cleaner, could have been actually nice. But I think it might be like what they want to do to free up Grady, because if they just try and run Grady off something like that, like they want him coming up court, like he's in a boxing match a lot of the time. So maybe preempting with a screen and having some sort of like decoy action means that I don't know if Mathurin would have gotten to the boxing match with him regardless, but like maybe that's what it's trying to do. As far as like simplifying some stuff, like certainly you could, because they waited quite a while for that play to develop. But at this point, I still haven't seen enough to know like, okay, what works ironclad and what doesn't. But like as you say, like there's fluff there, but the fluff could be there for a reason. Or it could just be like,
I just feel like I watch it and I'm like,
fellas.
why wouldn't you rather just have that as an empty corner? And then even if you were just doing this portion of it and having Grady automatically go into the stack so that you can just flow to the next action if you don't get it. I don't know. I thought that about like a couple play types that I watched last night where I was just like, I feel like it's the Jane Austen novel and I'm having a little trouble following this dialogue.
Yeah. When they try and go like empty side corner, guys are like beating the hell out of Grady. A lot of times, like you're not getting uphill, no way. So I think if I had to guess, again, maybe that's just like going through the motion of offense. It obviously could be. I haven't asked Darko, been like, yeah, you kind of like, you guys are just doing pointless stuff on offense. Have you noticed this? I haven't breached that topic with him, but
might get a bristly response.
I don't know if he's capable of bristle, to be quite honest with you. I've really enjoyed the back and forth with Darko. He's very charitable, which was different than what I got with Rick. But yeah, I think the best I can guess is that like they're putting more over there so that there's less focus on Grady, who will be coming up court. But I mean, they like Chris could have just as easily came up court too. I imagine like he rejected it, but Chris comes up court out of that stuff all the time. So yeah. I'll keep an eye on it though. I will watch with like a more critical eye of like, why are you guys doing that? My friend Caitlin came over and she told me you guys are maybe you shouldn't be doing that.
I mean, and it might honestly. I mean, Grady is still the runaway leader and running off of off-ball screens. So there is a draining effect on the people that have to guard him by virtue of doing this.
Or maybe they really like that Grady's first, and
so
they're like, let's keep him in first. Yeah. We have to celebrate all the
staggers to this action.
Yeah, they do run a lot of staggers.
Okay, well, the Pacers are in the middle of losing 4 of their last 6 games. I honestly was hoping this game was going to be a little bit better, but my expectations going into it were quite low because I felt like this was going to be a tricky matchup, especially with how many people they had out. But I'm going to close it out and just let you have the floor, and anything else Pacers related that you've noticed or you want to talk about or that you want to share with everybody that maybe I didn't think of or didn't see.
Oh, geez. We've talked like an hour and a half. We've talked a lot of Pacers. I'm trying to think.
I mean, these were going to be brief closing thoughts.
Oh, okay. Brief closing thoughts. Ben Shepherd is better than people think he is.
Ben Shepherd is a fun guy.
Ben Shepherd is better than people think he is. He and Nemhard, having both them out is like terrible. Like truly, truly terrible. And I don't know. I asked a lot of the questions I had of the Pacers, and I asked them of you, like, hey, what's going on here? You know, my curiosities have been answered for the most part in what could be answered. There's still a lot that's like up in the air, but just more game film, and maybe like 27 games in, we'll have more clear-cut answers to stuff. But yeah.
One final last fun question, I suppose, is hot girl basketball really hasn't been here. Do you think it's coming back? Do you think we'll see it again?
This might not be a very hot year of basketball, I'll be honest. A lot of things have to break correctly for them to reclaim hot girl status.
I hope so, because I like that shirt, and I haven't really been wearing it that much because it feels a little bit ironic now.
Yeah, the agrarian economy of buckets has been replaced with like a farmer walk across the field, trudging along. This is farmer basketball. This is not hot girl basketball.
Human buckets, but
yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, to let everybody know, you've now been reintroduced to Samson, or if you didn't watch any of the videos from the playoffs, I'm sure you've sat here and listened to his takes and been very impressed by.
By the way, big shout out to Peter if he watches this. Basketball She Wrote patron at a rock climbing gym in Toronto recognized me, was like, hey, I know you through Caitlin in Toronto. That's how big Caitlin is, that like in Toronto you get recognized for her work.
Well, somebody brought you up to me in Indy too, which I already let you know about, who was impressed by your work. So hey, what do you know? But
it was Rick, wasn't it?
I'm not going to answer that, but I guess what we'll do here is Samson is going to be contributing. I told people that in the mailbag. I told people that on Twitter. I think you're all going to really enjoy his work. So I'll let you plug yourself and what all you have going on beyond the nice things I've already said about you.
Sure. There is a James Wiseman piece that just never got to see the light of day. I had started. Maybe I get to write it next year. And this month it'll be Pascal, and that's like that stuff. If you like the Raptors, RaptorsRepublic.com is good, but I mean, I'm here for Pacer stuff with Caitlin, so that's what's forthcoming.
But the good news is a lot of people who subscribe to my Patreon are fans of basketball. They're not all Pacer fans. It's people that like and enjoy basketball, and if you like and enjoy basketball, you're going to like Samson's work on the Pacers, and you're also going to like his work on the Raptors.
I'll also say I know a lot of really like high level people subscribe to this Patreon, and if anybody is looking for interesting stuff about the Raptors that you'd like to put into your work, you can come grab it from mine.
I'm gonna leave that there. I don't have comments in response to that, but yeah. So thank you again for coming on. I haven't done any podcasting in quite some time, so I'm hoping this was listenable to people, and it wasn't just me blabbing on about stuff that didn't make sense or weren't salient points, and that you're not just going to be leaving a bunch of comments being like, hey, girl, none of that was right and it was all inaccurate. But I guess feel free to say that if that's what you thought. But I'm hoping that we'll be able to do more of these throughout the season if Samson's schedule allows. So thanks to everybody again for listening, and sorry this game wasn't more entertaining, but hopefully you have a better understanding of what's been going on with the Pacers, since that's the main question I get asked all the time. Hey, Caitlin, what's going on with the Pacers? I feel like, I don't fully know, but I'm giving my best effort. But thanks again, and we'll talk to you next time.